the go-ahead to start. So thank you for my goodness. Thank you for the very few of you who've managed to stay here until the end of the day. We had a chat about who was to introduce the next speaker, and because Paul's from Scotland, everybody said, "Well, Michael, you can introduce because you're from Scotland. You're Scottish." And I said, "Well, I'm not really Scottish." And I saw Paul at the breakfast table today, and I went, "How do we chat with him?" And then I realized that Paul's not Scottish either. So it's a non-Scottish person introducing another non-Scottish person, which kind of works, I guess. Paul tells me he's an ambulance driver, but I know that's not true. And you know it yourself when you look at his biography, which is extensive. But Paul is the lead consultant paramedic for the Scottish Ambulance Service and is currently seconded to the Scottish Government to help with international development, and is heading off to Zambia in a few weeks to help sort out their EMS service. Paul's not going to tell us about that, or I don't think he is, but he's going to tell us about the work that he's been doing in Scotland to save Scottish people's lives. So please welcome Paul.
Well, it's always the people talk about, what's the hardest session to do? The hardest session, just before lunch, just after lunch, just before the bar. It could be quite difficult. But what I'm going to try and do over the next 30 minutes or so, share with you what we've done around cardiac arrest in Scotland. Heard some of the speakers today and walking around, seen some of the high fidelity, really scientific simulation. Looking at the stands where they had, the publications and the posters. So I'll probably not talk about any of that. So as I say, I am an ambulance driver. I drove an ambulance for a long time, but things have developed. So I'm a consultant paramedic. Spent a bit of time at ASPiH, learning about leadership and about change. I went to Seattle. It was great to see the speaker this morning. And as you said, I'm from Newcastle. So when I go places, so when I went to Seattle, stole a lot of stuff from there. Went to Australia, Melbourne, stole all their stuff. Went to the Scottish Government, been there twice now. There's nothing to steal from there. Spend a bit of time on the aircraft still. Normally as ballast, as they like to put it, but I still try and keep my clinical time in and work on responding to calls in my car. That's not my car, but it's a car. But I spend a bit of time going to cardiac arrest, and I've spent a lot of my career going to cardiac arrests. So this is Scotland from space, for those who don't know Scotland too much. But we're a big ambulance service. 3,500 staff covering the whole country. 60 inhabited islands. So when people say to me, go to London Ambulance Service, find out what they do. They don't have many roads shut for snow. They don't have many inhabited islands. The Isle of Dogs, but I don't think that counts. And they've got, really big PCI and cardiac centres on their doorstep. So they don't have the remote and rural challenges we have. We've got 150 locations. I've heard a lot of talk today about simulation centres and some expensive simulation centres. So if somebody would like to donate, where's the chaps from Laerdal? If you want to give me 150 high fidelity simulation centres and just put them in Scotland for me so I can train all my staff how to do CPR, that would be lovely. 650 vehicles. So again, moving stuff about is a logistic challenge for us. Busy ambulance service and volunteers. Lots of volunteers to help us with our challenges in remote and rural Scotland. And we get calls for a lot of cardiac arrests. The deep fries Mars bar was made in Glasgow. If anybody's watching the Paramedics programme on at the moment from Sydney, the guys at Bondi who they've just done an Ironman challenge. Do I look like I do Ironman challenges? So, we get a lot of opportunity to deal with cardiac arrest in Scotland. And we try and resuscitate quite a lot of people as well. So, don't know anybody in the audience from other ambulance services, but 3,500 resusc attempts is a lot. So, how did I get started on this journey around trying to tackle cardiac arrest? So the reason I got involved was quite simple. A really clever doctor couldn't go. So the really clever doctor guy got an invite to go to Eutstein Abbey to look at hospital cardiac arrest. And he couldn't make the flight. He couldn't go. And so they asked me to go. My wife was like, that, superb, get you out the road for a few days, of course you can go. And when I got there, it was really interesting. I was the only paramedic in the room. I was the only paramedic who'd been invited to the worldwide Global Alliance meeting to deal with out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. I'm not saying this tribal leadership goes on in medicine, but it'd be quite useful to have somebody there who works outside the hospital. So I went back to the Scottish Ambulance Service, and by the way, I've just been to this scientific meeting. It was absolutely fantastic. It was quite cool. I was the only paramedic in the room. And I really think we could do something in Scotland. And this is the sort of answer that came back. What's the point? They all die anyway. Let's hear what the patients think about that attitude to cardiac arrest. I don't know if the volume can go up a touch.
I was going to be in this position. Getting your head around it has been very difficult. And it has changed. It has definitely changed. We're going on a different path now in our life, because this is always going to be with me.
We never thought anything like this would ever happen to us. That was silly of us to think that, really. Of course it can happen to anybody.
Hadn't been feeling great all day. Just felt a bit tired and a bit worn out, more than normal.
It came to about 9 o'clock and Gregor said, I'm getting really cold, and he put the log burner on, which we kind of thought was a bit, again, in hindsight, you think maybe that's a bit abnormal.
That's the last thing I remember is leaving the room. I don't remember anything after.
I went upstairs and saw him holding onto the rug in a straight position with his chest puffed out and his face blue.
Of course, Harry was the first one to see him, so he was in shock, and then I had to call the ambulance.
I couldn't work out how somebody in a split second could be so unresponsive. He looked dead.
I was on another emergency call down in the harbour area, and the crew had arrived. My phone went off and it was ambulance control saying, we've got a cardiac arrest up at Station Road, can you go up there? So just picked up my bag, got into the car, and was probably up at the house about 2 minutes after the call had been made.
I knew that I needed to try something, and doing the first compressions, hearing his ribs breaking, I didn't realise I had that much strength in my body. I couldn't remember the ratio that we get taught, so I kind of made it up as I went along, I think. I did more compressions, and I just remember just praying to everybody.
It's quite clear Gregor was having a cardiac arrest. He was on the floor, got the defib out as quick as I could, got the pads on Gregor and delivered a shock. Another 45 seconds to a minute of CPR, he gave a cough, and much to my great relief, regained consciousness.
And then I kind of knew he was okay when he started to swear profusely.
I was very surprised to discover that I'd had a cardiac arrest. I'm fit and healthy and well. I've not got any underlying health issues at all, or I wasn't aware of any. So a complete shock to everybody.
Everything, absolutely, from Harry calling the shot that something was seriously wrong, to me getting there, Ailey phoning for the ambulance.
Robert in ambulance control, although I hadn't booked off the job I was on, he realised that I would be free because the crew had arrived, so he got in touch with me and asked me to go up there, and then I got him shocked, and then the ambulance crew arrived and got him up to hospital.
It worked perfectly, absolutely. Everybody played their part, and they did it 100%. And the success is here today. He's with us.
Everything worked in his favour, and it really just shows the chain of survival is just not some theory, but it does work if everything's in place.
And that's what it should be for everybody. I'm with my family, I'm at home, you walk along the street and nobody would think there's anything different. And that's a good thing. And there's a lot of people a lot worse. And it could have been a lot worse for me. And that's what you've just got to remember.
So, Gregor locks up bad guys for a living still. He's still a member of Police Scotland. He's getting to see his family grow up, and it just gets rid of that thought that they all die anyway. And it takes a system. So, how many people here work in intensive care? So, how many people in here have something to do with simulation? But when you run your simulations, you probably think about your environment, about in the hospital or in intensive care. So Gregor spent a long time in intensive care, and there was an awful lot of things had to happen to get him there. Very often I hear, oh, we ran a big scenario, we included A&E. Yeah, but how do the patients get to A&E? It's quite interesting. I quite like throwing challenges out. So I've seen you've got some special interest groups. It's great. Really good if we could have maybe a pre-hospital special interest group. I don't know. I heard a couple of people talking at coffee who were doing things, some of the things we've been asked to do with GPs, about GP emergencies, when that patient collapses in the waiting room. They don't have the opportunity to train and drill the way other parts of the service do, so think about that. So Scottish Ambulance Service, big unit. We got a survivor, so we involved a patient who would come and tell his story. Gregor went and spoke to the minister, and it was really good. We get a lot of emergencies, and we get a lot of emergencies for life-threatening calls. So there's a need. We needed to do something differently. This is some old data from the HeartStart database, and the only thing I want you to remember about this side is that number, 20%. 1 in 5 patients were getting to hospital with a pulse that were given you a chance in your ITU and you a chance in your A&E to do something. Because I know a lot of patients, when they get to the ED or when they go to ITU, might not survive to discharge. I'll tell you what I guarantee you though, is if we don't get the patient with a ROSC to the ED, then they definitely won't survive. So from the community and the ambulance service point of view, we need to be starting that system to give you a fighting chance for all of the great work you do to make a difference. So just remember that 20%. And it's, there's been lots of research on this, and people have gone into the use of evidence really strongly. And the evidence has been around for a while around cardiac arrest. So there's 2 things you need. You need hands on the chest, and you need defibrillation. Ideally, you want bystander hands on the chest, and you want public access defibrillation. Anybody here working in an ambulance service? Good, I can pick on you. It's really good because I can still see you. So I bet your ambulance service is dead upset about response times, because they all are. And the reality is 8 minutes is the measure of how good you are at an ambulance service. So if you've got a cardiac arrest and nobody does anything for 8 minutes, you're not totally, but you're almost wasting your time. So that system needs to get people there earlier, and we'll talk about that. And think of it like we talk about the chain of survival, but think of it like a baton race. The community handing over to EMS, EMS handing over to the ED, and then hopefully the ED being able to hand over to the ITU. So how do you build the system? Well, the first thing you need to do is involve the bystanders. When you think about, using things like feedback, education and training, simulation and evidence, how often do you build that, take that right down to your community group? How often do you feed back with your ambulance service and with those paramedics who've been grafting for 45 minutes or an hour? We'll talk about how we've done some of this in Scotland. In hospital is really important, but aftercare. So my dad had an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. He was on the roof when he arrested. It's a good story. He's still alive. So he falls off the roof, bangs his head. There's a whole drama. Does he have the arrest because he bangs his head, or do you have the arrest on the roof? My dad's daft as a brush now, but he was daft as a brush before he had his cardiac arrest. It's not really bothered him in any way, shape or form. But my mum, every time he sneezes, every time he stumbles, every time he doesn't feel quite right. So think about, we've had to give a lot of thought about the aftercare, not just for the patients, but for the carers and their families. For us, it was very much about pulling in data. So anybody here is from Scotland, ITU in Scotland, they've got loads of really good data. We couldn't access that as an ambulance service, so we knew we took patients to hospital. We didn't really know what happened with them. But what we have now is they're starting to build a data warehouse, a cardiac arrest registry. Anybody who's going to the workshops tomorrow about how to build a system, and Dave Bywater, our consultant paramedic from Scotland, who's led the implementation of this work, is going to talk about this a lot. But first thing about getting your ground data, how many of you use pre-hospital data when you're thinking about how you're going to take forward your work? Or do you think about the ED, or do you just think about the ward or the intensive care unit or wherever it is you work? So our starting point, 3,500 cardiac arrests a year. Depends on which bit of paper you read, because to be honest with you, we didn't have the data, and more guys arrest than girls. Pre-hospital care. So we focused on Edinburgh first. So I've heard a couple of people talk about improvement methodology. People will talk about Seattle having a great attitude and a great response to cardiac arrest, or Melbourne. And the pressure in Scotland very much could have been about, right, let's just do the whole country, and that's really difficult. So we started in Edinburgh. And what we were able to do very early on was be able to map where we have cardiac arrests. It's quite funny, you have cardiac arrests where there's people. Again, if you go and listen to Dave speak tomorrow, he'll tell you a little bit about how we respond differently in rural settings, where the cows and the sheep live. But predominantly where people live, that's where we'll have the highest number of our cardiac arrests. But the interesting thing is, if you look at this heat map of Edinburgh, you're far more likely to have your cardiac arrest if you're from a deprived area. The community group probably won't be as active, or may not be as active, and won't be as active around cardiac arrest. So for us, it all starts in the control room. Has anybody ever had to dial 999 before? Ask for an ambulance? The last thing you need is us to be asking you lots and lots of questions. Because if the patient's not having a bad day, neither is the person who's phoning 999. This is the algorithm our call takers had to go through to the point of where they were getting an ambulance mobile to you to that cardiac arrest. So we were able to run it. Now, the funny thing about an ambulance service, we're not really geared to the whole world of simulation. We never have been. We're getting there. Things are improving, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. But we're very much there, the here and now. So to try and, why don't we try and run this in the control room that's got 400 outstanding 999 calls on the stack? It can be really difficult. So we were able to take, and this is one of the very first times we looked at simulation and running and modelling simulations for cardiac arrest. And if you remember nothing else about this site that's really busy, look at the number of boxes. And then we got to this number of boxes. And we reduced the time to respond to cardiac arrest and getting hands on the chest. We've not, as an ambulance service, we've not carried out any clinical intervention. Well, we have, but we haven't been at scene with the patient. This is getting members of the public to get their hands on the chest quicker. And all we did was run a couple of simulations, different scenarios in the control room, and take out the non-value added steps. Next thing is when you get there, how many people in the room respond to cardiac arrest or have responded to cardiac arrest in the hospital before? Keep your hand up if when you've been seen, there are 6 people in that resource room? 7? 8? 9? 10? 11? 12? Right, we'll stop at 12, okay? Lots of people in. Remember, I respond in my car, on my own. And if I'm there on my own, I have to do A, B, and C. I don't have a huge team. How many people have done manual CPR? We'll talk about it. Right, imagine doing that for 45 minutes on your own, and intubating, and getting access, and giving drugs, and fluids, and doing your reversible causes, and thinking about how you're going to extricate the patient. It's really difficult. So one of the key things for us was about looking at the numbers of people we get to a cardiac arrest. Again, small heat mapping. In Edinburgh, where we were doing the trial around cardiac arrest, the yellow and the reds are where we got more than 2 pair of hands to the scene. Glasgow, where we weren't doing the trial, are the black dots. But the use of visualization for us to look at what was happening on the ground was again new. So straight away I'm going to ask you, not that anybody wants to have a cardiac arrest, but if you did, do you want to have it in Glasgow or do you want to have it in Edinburgh? You can tell just by looking at that. Really lucky, Richard Lyons was out doing some work. He was actually, it's quite interesting about research. So what he'd been funded for was to look at temperature control in cardiac arrest. So there's a couple of papers out, been in hospital and out of hospital studies around, initially it was around cooling people down. How many people here are from Scotland? So when somebody has a cardiac arrest, by definition, the blood's not going around their body. In Scotland, do we think they're going to need cooled down early on? Maybe. 17th of July, 1927 and 1952. But when these papers come from out of Arizona and out of Melbourne, it's really interesting. Gives you something to read. But very early on in his research, Richard found, folk are cold enough anyway in Scotland when they collapse and they've got no circulating volume. It's just a thing that happens. So what Richard, because he'd been funded, is anybody here who funded Richard, by the way? Good. So what Richard did with the funding opportunity was maximised it and probably stretched the protocol a little bit. So yep, they're cold, that's fine. I'll write that up and we'll publish that. We'll be happy. But what we looked at was the use of telemetry and use of feedback. So our defibrillators, we get feedback from them. We're getting feedback from them. So red line, good compression. No red line, no compressions. The most important thing is hands on the chest and defibrillation. We've not got any hands on the chest really there, have we, for the first 4 minutes? Anybody think what we were trying to do for those first 4 minutes? Do you have clues? Any anaesthetists in the room? So what we were trying to do as paramedics for the first 4 minutes? Intubate. If you intubate somebody who's dead, you don't do anything to make them alive, then they'll stay dead. Paramedics feel quite good about themselves putting tubing people, but the reality is what we needed was really good BLS, hands on the chest. But look at feedback. This was for the first time we were feeding back to people. The green line is when Richard arrives. Remember, he's not bothering with esophageal temperature probe anymore because of the cold, you know that. All Richard did was introduce to us something called non-technical skills. He led the team. He said, Paul, you stay on the chest. And when you're tired, tell Dave to go on the chest instead of you. And then when we get another set of hands here, they can go on the chest, and then we can get a definitive airway sorted out. And when we've got those 3 people at the scene, one will do A, one will do compressions, one will get access from drugs and we'll rotate round. We didn't get the 12 people at scene. Been to some cardiac arrests, pre-hospital cardiac arrests in Seattle, they do with a minimum of 8. But then we started feeding back to crews about how well they'd done. So if you can imagine, from these lines, we produce this report, and it's very simple. You want your red line to be in the green. We started feeding back to crews. Got to the point where crews were contacting Stephen Short, who ran this part of the program. Steve, where's my feedback? What do you mean? No, I want to know how well I've done. I want to know, could I have done better? I want to know what did I miss? Now, historically in the ambulance service, the only time people got feedback was when they'd made a mistake. But these people, paramedics, boys and girls out on the road, are now actively asking, how can you help us do our job better? Remember, we're only getting feedback from the DFibs. Set up groups and start to do training. So again, you do your training as a paramedic and then you probably don't see another mannequin for a long time. But these are the guys starting to run it themselves in Edinburgh. Low fidelity. But hands on the chest. Non-technical skills. How we're going to rotate round. The thing is, we don't get that many patients in a well-lit room. Up on a trolley bed with 360 access. So did lots of training outside as well in the environment. But after that intervention, our time on the chest improved. Because we knew when you get your feedback, you're going to get told, what was your compression rate like? What was your time on the chest like? What was your pause like? What was your pre-shock pause? This was stuff that you had been doing in hospital, but we were able to take into pre-hospital. So basically, we took these guys, put them on the car, and they go out and respond to cardiac arrest in Edinburgh. Now look what's happened. Squiggly line, it's not VF, it's compressions. So compression improved. But then we've got another big pause. What's that big pause in the middle then? 9-10 minutes in. Give you a clue, we can't build the hospital around the patient. So when we move, we have to extricate the patient. 2 or 3 people need to get the patient, need to tie them onto an orthopedic, pick them up, and need to extricate them. At that point, there's no quality CPR ongoing. We'd got the audit done, and we'd got the basics done. We needed to think about some clever stuff. Targeted education and the leadership non-technical skills all came before kit. And the kit that we introduced was mechanical CPR. Now, if you give folk equipment, you want to know how they're going to use it, yeah? How many people do you think honestly would turn around and say, I really didn't use that very well? Nobody's got their hand up. Because nobody is keen to go forward and say, you know, I really didn't use that piece of equipment well, especially after being trained and educated. So how are we going to find out, how, you know, we can't be at every cardiac arrest, how could we find out what's happening at the scene? So we could have bought a couple of GoPros, stick them on, video the cardiac arrest, use the GoPro, watch it on YouTube. Obviously we couldn't do that, but again, learning from our colleagues at the Simulation Centre and learning from our colleagues in the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, they were using cameras all the time. They were using them as training tools and we used them in the research room. So this is all old hat to you guys. I've seen videos like this a lot today. But imagine if you could get that sort of information from the scene. So this is what we came up with. Video recording from the scene at cardiac arrests. The data gets taken from the video camera, held in a secure network and used for audit. It's a really strong reason why it's used for audit and couldn't be used for research in its purest sense, which is very, very much around some of the challenges we had around patient confidentiality and consent. But we weren't introducing new treatment to the patient. What we were doing was looking at what we were already doing, which was service improvement. It then goes into the back cave, which is a cupboard at the Royal Infirmary. People talk about the research resuscitation group in Edinburgh, and I've been lucky enough to go back to Eugene and speak to them about this. And I think they think it's a big, like Tracy Island or something. And we've got, these people there with massive brains. So we've got 3 folks stuck in a cupboard who use stolen PCs from other parts of the hospital and look at the data. And this is the sort of thing they get to view on the videos. Now this video is of absolutely no clinical or scientific importance at all. It's just really, really cool when he hits the speed bump in a minute. So, the use of cameras is important, but when he hits the speed bump here and then lands, it's stuff we can use to look at his driving, but could we use that for cardiac arrest? This is cardiac arrest. I'll give the punchline away. John, who's just won first prize in the Deadest Man in Scotland competition, who's the patient, has give us permission to use the video. So by definition, John does okay.
Stop compressions while sensor thingies can fuck off. No.
So we can see the auto pulse going on. If you speak to the crew, they'll say it took 10 seconds. It took 25 seconds to put that auto pulse on. If you look at the crew's EPRF, there'll be no stop in continuity of CPR. But the camera doesn't lie. This is later on in the same cardiac arrest. If anybody would like to take note of how secure the ET tube is. It's being held there by gravity. But again, if you look at the crew PRF or you speak to the crew, they will have secured that they will have secured the ET tube. Things we learned about leaving the band on. So the procedure was to take the band off. You don't need to do that, you can leave the band on. So initially this was Mark 1 human eyeball, using it as a debrief tool. And it will absolutely get you high impact publications, video and cardiac arrests. People all go about, the New England Medical Journal. Natural. Tell you what, when this appears in the national press for the next 3-4 days, it's a great ask you have of your chief executive to let you continue what you're doing. So I get a phone call from chief exec. What on earth are these guys doing at the Royal? Well, it's not really the guys at the Royal, it's sort of us as well, because it's in the back of an ambulance, so we've had to be part of that. But you didn't blink. The ultimate question was, is this benefiting patients? Is this helping our staff? And is it the right thing to do? And we stuck with it. The rules are really simple. We don't video every job. We may well use video cameras more in the future for feedback and for audit, but at the moment, we only use it for cardiac arrest. It's only used for audit. It's never used as an individual assessment, as in, Paul, you were rubbish. It's for the audit group's eyes only. Hopefully, if you Google cardiac arrest Edinburgh 3RU, videos won't come up on YouTube. Hope nobody's doing that, because then if they put the hand up and say it is doing that, then it's going to be pretty long night for me. But data set's kept secure and it's deleted as soon as it's audited, and I'm going to show you quickly how it's audited. And we've been absolutely through the mill with this, with the press, with the government, and with the legal team. And you, funnily enough, you don't have to ask somebody in cardiac arrest for permission to video them. You would always switch it off if a family member or bystander asked you to do so. But we need to be brave about how do we learn about what happens in the pre-hospital care environment. So we've now come up with this perfect 10. Based on the evidence we have, is that at 10 minutes you make a decision. At 10 minutes we either need to move if those patients are in things like refractory VF and get them to PCI centre, or we need to stay at scene. But at 10 minutes you start making some big decisions about splitting that team up and about how you're going to move. We've got KPIs for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest now, which for an ambulance service, you know, when we started on this journey in 2008, it was new. The only measures we had was, did you get there in 8 minutes? This was the start of outcome, based on our clinical outcome measures. How do we order? Well, I was going to put a photo up here of Man United and the amount of passes made and stuff, but I thought I'm in the Northwest, so I better not. So we've used the science that's been used around sport, so you know, it'll say player passed 100 yards, how many goals did this score. We use something called studio code. We've developed that. I wasn't really aware of this, how you abuse medical students, but we get a medical student and they sort of lock them in the back cave and make them go through lots of videos. But it's good for their learning, the doctors tell me. But you get the video of the cardiac arrest, we get the output from the defibrillator, and they do the data collection and audit what's happened. Anna's done some fantastic work and takes the matrix from that, and we can get something we can measure. So we take the qualitative data and turn it into quantitative data. Being able to publish on this, and Adam, who's doing his PhD around this stuff, this was new for ambulance services to get into working together as part of the team, as part of the system, getting work published in 2007 was new stuff. And where we are now is we have research paramedics, we have paramedics doing PhDs absolutely embedded in those research teams, especially in Edinburgh. Anybody who's read the latest evidence about does mechanical CPR affect outcomes? So the jury's out, probably doesn't. Tell you what though, makes it a lot easier to extricate the patient if you have to. And if the patient arrests, like John did, in the back of that moving ambulance, we can then carry out CPR at a high quality that we wouldn't be able to do without it. But when we look at what end of the spectrum, how many folk have been to a conference lately that's talked about ECMO or pre-hospital ECMO? Seen the photo of the guy at the Louvre getting his pre-hospital ECMO. The reality is, the large number of these resuscitations happen, or the best intervention we can do is at the wide end of this curve. It's going to be the low-tech interventions that are going to give you guys the biggest opportunity in hospital. So what's important from our point of view in Scotland has been about working with communities to get hands on the chest in early defibrillation. Well, thousands of people trained in a day. How to get their hands on the chest. They all got feedback, and they all got to do simulated practice rather than just watching a video. That'll increase the chance of survival by 700%. Take as little as 20 minutes. For Scotland, we managed to get those planets to line up. We had lots of organisations who'd been in this space and in this space for a long time. We had the medics who were, working well on simulation, running practices. The thing this morning, the time to practice is not on the patient. We didn't drill cardiac arrest. We weren't auditing the data. We weren't thinking about the non-technical skills, how many people we needed to be there. That culminated in the strategy for Scotland. Everybody signed up to it. From schools, 7-year-old and above, to the minister. And the challenge is that we'll save an extra 1,000 lives by 2020. I started off by, what's the point? They all die anyway. Why get an ambulance bloke standing up, speak to dead clever scientist people, pleading with them to involve us in building a system that'll save lives. Can anybody remember that slide? What was the survival rate at arrival at hospital? 20%. 48%. It's more than doubled. I've not been involved in any big trials around pharmacy, but apparently if there was something we had that could double your chance of survival, we'd all sign up to do it.
Always with you, Lieutenant. What you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try.
Thank you.
Has anybody got any questions for Paul? I love that quote from the guy, Gregor says, I was surprised to hear that I had a cardiac arrest. I thought that was, and wouldn't it be great if there was more of that kind of people being able to say that. I guess my main question is about why has it taken us so long?
So I think it's about that evidence base and joining up. So my job in the ambulance service, I do a bit around cardiac arrest, but I do a bit around trauma. If I speak to the trauma guys, that's the most important thing we need to be looking at. Speak to the sepsis guys though. Pre-hospital antibiotics is the most important thing. So why is it taking so long? We all concentrate on what we're looking at. We just need to look wider and steal stuff. I think I'm from Newcastle. I'm not averse to stealing stuff. So if stuff's happening in Seattle and Arizona and Melbourne, I'll use a really good example around cardiac arrest. Yeah, for them, there was the big trials that came out around looking at temperature control for patients post-cardiac arrest. But they'd already done some really good stuff before then, so instead of looking at the sexy paper of the moment, mechanical CPR, the Paramedic 2 trial around adrenaline, make sure you get your basics right first. Because if you need that foundation and working together. So I've been up to the Sim Centre now. I never got to do that early in my career. You know what I mean? So building that, it's a team sport.
Thank you very much. Thanks again, Tom.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. There's a few SIGs on now. Pediatrics, emergency medicine, and managers and directors. Otherwise, we'll see you at 7:30 for drinks and then dinner at 8. Thank you very much.